And so you don't have the idea of uniformity, but rather you have the idea of difference, but not simply difference, but inequality, because difference and inequality are certainly not the same things. And then we think then of the term diversity, and we begin to then register the implications of this term. So when I say that cinema is a discursive apparatus, what I mean is that it will, in this context, generate a certain set of discourses around, for instance, the nation state, to which it has been very, very closely wedded in so many logistical and structural ways. So it is not incidental, for instance, that cinema, and many of you have been watching cinema, I'm sure, for decades, that I myself have. And you will find that it has typically returned to the question of the nation state, whether in Mother India, or whether in a different way in a film like Diwar, or in a film like Zappin, or in a film on war films, a series of war films, or in the nationalist film like Bhagat Singh, and so on and so forth, return to the question of the nation state again and again and again, to try and register both the scope of this entity and the terms on which we are supposed to engage with something. Now, representation is not a very, unlike the kind of a popular understanding of it, representation is never a neutral thing. I was listening to the short a set of remarks that the principal made, and I was thinking while he was making those remarks on the power of representation itself, and how things can come to be represented in a certain way, which problematizes so intensely the relationship between representation and truth. For us who look at literature, or I think any art form, the question of truth is always there, waiting in the wings to be looked at. Art is supposed to be the representation of things, not just in a truthful fashion, some would say faithful, and which is a much easier thing to deal with. Truth is a far more complex thing to deal with. But art should be faithful to life. But some would say art need not be faithful to life at all. Whether you agree with the premise or not, the question is there for us to look at. And I think one can express it best as thinking of what is at stake in representation. What is at stake in representing something? Political theorists, social rights activists, scholars from different disciplines have always talked about the right to be visible, the right to speak, to represent oneself, because there is in the problem of representation always, there is tied up to the question of representation, I should say, always the idea of authenticity. And so the cinematic apparatus, the discursive apparatus of cinema is also dealing with questions of authenticity, questions of truth, questions of not just what should be represented, that is always a choice. What you choose to represent or not is always a choice. The terms on which you choose to represent it is always a choice as well. But also how convincing it is yet another issue. The question of authenticity actually was returned to center stage with this modern machine called camera. And what the camera does, unlike art, what the camera succeeds in doing is stilling for that moment, life as it is. We're all, I think, at least some of us are being filmed at the moment. We will then later on go back and look at with some surprise at ourselves. And there is that very interesting moment of misrecognition when sometimes you don't recognize yourself. But the camera's claim, of course, is a claim of authenticity, that as you are, you will appear. And this was a radical departure from art, and Walter Benjamin, when he thought about the machine of the visible, cameras, Kermode spoke about it as the machines of the visible, and Walter Benjamin spoke about it as the removal of the aura that this mechanical machine achieved, by which he meant, of course, that if you go to look at a Picasso or an M.F. Hussain or a Tayyab Mehta, it is a single painting. And people flock to museums to see these paintings. And then you buy a reproduction on the way back that will remind you of the painting. But that is not the case with the film reel. Now no longer the film reel, but the digital film. It's the same thing, copied again and again and again, exactly the same. And this is one crucial departure that cinema, as a form, as a medium, achieved, as it moved the question of art, not just away from the idea of originality in that sense, the one original picture, but moved it also, I think, flipped the question of the aura around the painting is different. There is no aura around the film, there is an aura around the star. So there is then a sort of shift that takes place there. And I think reintroduced forcefully the question of industry and commerce. So it is not simply that what Tayyab Mehta needs is, of course, his wonderful canvas and his wonderful palette, and an idea and paint and whatever goes into that. But maybe he can buy for a couple of lakh if he's using really expensive stuff, or maybe even not that, maybe within 50,000. But you cannot make a film in 50,000 rupees. Even in the age, but now with the age of digitization, it is possible to make a film, but can you market it? Can you distribute it? Can you assemble, the commercial film as it is? So then the idea of commerce as it got very intricately linked to cinema. When we think of cinema as an industrial medium today, we think of it more in terms of its relation to industry. But cinema as an industrial medium, as it was thought of initially when it came into existence, was in relation to the industrial processes required to actually process a film. Raw stock, the film itself, raw stock, the entire huge apparatus that goes into making a film, from your dolly, from your trolleys and your camera, and the story goes that Satyajit Ray made his films with his old-fashioned handheld camera without even ever used a crane. But he managed, in any case, to make these extraordinary films. But he had to manage. He had to figure a way around the logistics of that industrial mode of production in this particular way. So the apparatus of cinema, you see, is not simply a camera. It is not simply a set of discourses. It is about money. It is about the industry. It is about how you will frame something and how you will get people to come back and see that again and again and again. There's a very lazy argument that is given all the time when you ask people, why do you make this kind of film? They say, well, the audience likes it. It's a very lazy argument. It's passing about. It's really passing about. It's a safe decision, this works, and therefore try it again. Often, of course, it never works as it is supposed to. But nevertheless, there is, when you think about cinema now, a producer, a set of actors, an audience, and all together constituting this enormous thing which I think we can call the discursive apparatus of cinema. Who decides to produce, what they decide to produce, how eventually it is marketed and what we receive. I wanted to sort of take a step back now and just gloss one thing, sort of flag something for you. As I've discussed the discursive apparatus of cinema, I've talked about infrastructure and logistics on the one hand, this sort of flagged for you. And on the other hand, I've talked about a set of issues that return to us again and again and again. For instance, the nation state itself. Questions of moral good, heroism, and so on are also there, and we return to them again and again. But you've got here, you've got the narrative, and here you've got how this narrative is going to be produced. And they are both equally germane to this particular medium. You don't need just a pen and a pencil, but you need all of this. I want to do a bit of a rewind. Cinema is very old in India. We think of it as a modern machine, but it came to India in 1896, shortly after the first cinema, the first film was actually screened by the Lumiere brothers. It came to India very quickly. So it's an old part of our narrative and representational traditions. 1896. By the time Bhalke makes the first film, of course, J.F. Madan, Savi Dada has already made a series of short films. So it becomes a series of short films. It's astonishing because for the first time it seems that life can be captured as it is, not in stillness but in movement. So the first claim to authenticity that cinema makes is actually through the idea of movement. While on the one hand the photograph tends to capture verisimilitude, it's something exactly as it is, at least that is what the claim is. Many of us don't look like our photographs. And we wonder which is the real picture then. I mean, is this what I appear like to others? Is this what I really look like? I mean, or do I look like the way I look when I look at myself? So we are always returned to that question about which is the real impression in that sense. And this is aggravated even more in the context of the moving pictures, where with movement it appears that now life is captured as it actually is. And with cinema, of course, the added magic of cinema is, in a sense, you are not ever privy to the process of production. You don't know about the cuts, the number of cuts, the retakes, the makeup, the filters, everything that goes into that. We're simply privy to that final image, which one thinks of in literary terms as, in a sense, synectically. It is simply a part of the whole. And that entire whole that is invisibilized is so very important, and I draw some of it for you. But we just see that part of the whole. So this very old machine, this very old technology, this very old and familiar repertoire is available to us quite early on. And what the early filmmakers decide to do is see where the cinema can actually begin to replace theatre as a form of entertainment. And so cinema, the camera is bulky, it's difficult to carry, and so things are, things are transported. And then the local traditions are drawn on. So if you look at any average Hindi film, you will see a lot of songs, you will see dance, you will see what we call masala. And this idea of masala, so the theoreticians think of it in terms of rasas and so on, and Indian aesthetical traditions being fed into cinema, but it's also Parsi theatre. It's also theatrical forms, dance. And the presentation of the adoption of modes of narrative that are already present and familiar, folk tales, folk theatre, and dance forms that slowly become a part of cinema so that cinema can slowly replace theatre. This was the idea. When J.F. Madan went in, Adesha Irani went into the villages, to the more rural areas, they went with the idea to replace forms of entertainment that were already there. And Madan later went on to found Elphinstone Cinema in Calcutta, which is now legendary, and then it becomes J.F. Madan Theatres, and then Minerva Cinema, and so on. He realized that there are huge commercial possibilities here. This is not simply about a dance or a narrative or a story. This is about business. And he begins then, Madan is the one who forms the first cinema hall. Otherwise, cinemas were normally viewed in palm theatres. People just assembled something roughly, a wall was there, and it was shot on that. But then Madan decided that no, it has to be, a larger number of people have to be accommodated. A certain kind of